The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand, and we gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise, to get what we want, we got to organize.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Pantsula Podcast, brought to you by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. For those of you who are not familiar with the A-APRP, we were founded in 1968 by the late great Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first president of Ghana. And if you're not familiar with our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define as a total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. This definition wasn't brought up by whim or made up by whim, I should say. This is actually defined by the Fifth Pan-African Congress that took place in 1945 with the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, George Padmore, Amy Garvey, and other legendary Pan-Africanists who were in attendance at this Pan-African Congress. With that being said, today our main topic will be around the intersections of oppression in relation to Africans. But before we get started, as we do with each episode, for those of you who are familiar with us in this podcast, we like to commemorate this episode to two of our late great ancestors. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my comrade Jamilah to cover our two ancestors.
Oh, thank you, comrade. My goodness.
No problem.
I just really felt inspired by the first ancestor we're going to honor here. First of all, it took Lorraine Hansberry to really inspire me in order to be comfortable with calling myself a writer. I just didn't feel comfortable with labeling myself as anything at all. I didn't feel, maybe what I've written wasn't really worth enough to call myself a writer, but understanding that writing really should serve a bigger purpose. And so I said, I'm going to start calling myself a writer. So it was Lorraine Hansberry that really sparked that flame in me. But a person I do want to honor right now is Lucille Clifton. And she was a writer. She was based in Buffalo, New York. She was also considered to be a poet laureate based in Maryland. So she was inspired by folks like Langston Hughes. She was introduced to Langston Hughes's writing, the poetry of the Negro. She also traced the family's roots. So this is really interesting. A lot of people are like, whoa, the woman king or whatever. That's, not even getting into that. But she did trace her family's roots to the kingdom of Dahomey. And of course, that's now considered the Republic of Benin. And her mother told her, be proud, you're from Dahomey women. So that's, she was inspired by that. And then she took a lot of her poetry and she wrote poetry for children and informed children to be proud of who they were as African people. And so I'm going to read a couple of her poems here. So she has a poem called Homage to My Hips, 1987. These hips are big hips. They need space to move around in. They don't fit into little pretty places. These hips are free hips. So that's one piece. And then she has another piece, which is, there's a couple of her pieces as a disabled person, a person who's an amputee, has a few scars here and there. Yeah, I could definitely resonate with some of those. But she has another poem called 1994. It's written in 1996. She writes, I was leaving my 58th year when a thumb of ice stamped itself hard near my heart. You have your own story. You know about the fears, the tears, the scar of disbelief. So those are a couple of her poems. Another person, I think, and maybe the dogs, I don't know if you hear the dogs, but perhaps they agree with me. But another person, and she is not of African descent, but I think it is really crucial given what we are going to be addressing. I think she is an applicable person to be honored. Anime Pictou Aquash. So she was a person from the Mi'kmaq Nation based in Canada, and she was murdered at the behest of the state in 1975. There's a piece, a little bit I want to read from, and this is from Counterpunch. It's called Killing Anime Aquash and Smearing John Trudell. So I'm only going to read a little bit of that. It says, on February 24th, 1976, the frozen body of American Indian Movement or AIM activist Anime Pictou Aquash was found wrapped in a blanket in a ravine on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Aquash was with the militants who occupied the town of Wounded Knee, South Dakota for 71 days in 1973, the culmination of a reservation reign of terror that saw over 60 traditional Indians murdered. Anime, the highest ranking woman in the male-dominated AIM, American Indian Movement, had disappeared from Denver in December 1975. It also says Bureau of Indian Affairs pathologist Dr. W.O. Brown certified that she had, quote, died from exposure. In a very unusual move, her hands were severed and sent to the FBI for fingerprinting, and, even more unusual, she was quickly buried in a pauper's grave March 3rd before any identification was made or any burial permit issued. That same day, the FBI announced that the body was that of Aquash, the 30-year-old Mi'kmaq from Nova Scotia. Her Canadian family was informed by the FBI that she had, quote, died from natural causes. At her family's request, an exhumation order and a new autopsy was gained. On March 11th, a second autopsy revealed the true cause of death: an execution shot to the back of the head, and the .32 caliber bullet was recovered. Of course, this led to charges of an FBI cover-up. To this day, many believe that the FBI had her killed. And there is, of course, ample reason to believe this. Agent David Price, a maverick cowboy, even within that lawless agency, had arrested Aquash June 25th, 1975, and pressured her to cooperate with the authorities on a series of incidents. Most specifically, the famous shootout that left 2 agents and 1 indigenous person dead, and for which AIM leader Leonard Peltier, Free Leonard Peltier, is now serving time after being the sole person convicted. Price famously told Aquash that, quote, she'd be dead within a year should she not cooperate. Rest in power to Anna Mae Aquash. Rest in power to Lucille Clifton. Ashe, ashe, ashe. And before we get into what we're going to talk about, I've had this whole thing in my brain and I want to openly talk about. So, Sadiq, have you ever watched those programs like Tony Brown Journal or Like It Is, or even Crossfire, any of those shows? I mean,
No.
they're not on now, but you could watch them on YouTube.
Okay, no, I've never seen any. It sounds
Okay.
like action-packed films or something, or series.
No, they're actual shows that were on TV. They're like talk
Oh,
shows. And
yeah,
so,
I never seen that.
yeah, they spoke with people who have written literature, people who have written political books, people who were thinkers, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes there'd be exchanges of ideas and struggles on some of these programs.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, I've thought about this for years. I tried to figure out what's an effective way that TV can still have these exchanges of ideas, but not be so reactionary. And the issue is that TV has gotten so reactionary that there's not actual exchanges. It's just arguments. And I was thinking about this today, that a way of doing it is just giving people 5 seconds to answer something. So when you have these white supremacists on, and you can have someone that's revolutionary on as well, because you need to have these exchange of ideas. So all these people sort of rationalizing white supremacy, but they go, no, I don't mean it that way. So you just pose a few questions. So you ask both sides of the struggle, the ideological struggle, if you will. Say, do you look at your race or ethnicity, because that's what people focus on, do you look at your race or ethnicity as being the dominant in society? And so you get 5 seconds to answer that. So it's clearly yes or no. So they get yes or no. And then if they say yes and no, they have 10 seconds to answer as to why. And so I was thinking, with the white supremacists, they're either going to dance around it if their job is on the line or something. And so it's like, okay, you're saying yes or no, you're saying no answer. You have 10 seconds to answer why. And then my response to that would be, if I was on a panel of sorts, I would say, no, I do not consider my race or ethnicity to be superior, because the only superior race is the human race that organizes against these capitalistic systems of oppression. That's the more superior race. That would be my response.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Like, there's no individual race, because there's many people working towards the goal of eliminating this suppressive, oppressive, inhumane system. That's the race that's going to be the powerful one.
Exactly.
It's this individualizing of like, well, my race is better than your race. It's okay. I'm not rooting for all of us. So that would be my answer. And then the white supremacists, like, how would they answer? They're either going to have to say yes or no. And if they say no answer, they're going to have to answer to that. So that would be kind of the lightning round. Like, how would you answer questions like that?
No, I think kind of what you were saying in relation to the race thing, like race has no scientific basis for it, right? Like, you think of like, oh, black people, or even like brown people and yellow people, like that doesn't tie you to land, that doesn't tie you to anything. So inherently just believing in this whole notion of race, not to say that racialization doesn't have material impacts, doesn't affect, subjugated, colonized people around the world. But I would say that the whole notion of it in itself is a fallacy, because it doesn't tie you to anything. The only thing it ties you to is like crayon boxes and colors. And, especially for Africans, everyone that occupies Africa isn't considered quote unquote black. So it just makes it even more incoherent altogether. So, but I agree. I think though that's a really good method to having those type of talk shows and kind of pulling out the contradictions or making the contradictions more sharpened. With these white supremacists who try to evade these type of questions or try to like under euphemisms try to hide their over racism. So it kind of makes it more apparent, especially with a question like that. So for sure. But yeah, I think that that probably segues perfect into the topic in a way, around like the intersections of oppression in relation to Africans, right? And other people around the world, other colonized people around the world too. So with that, I know we were talking earlier about a topic around the word JIP and what was going on at a Breakfast Club. So if you could kind of gladly for our listeners who weren't listening, kind of rehash that story.
Not going to repeat that word. I'll just say the G word.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, I mean, you had to intro it, and that's the only way, because people would be like, what's the G word?
That's true.
And then if I said, well, a derogatory word for Roma people, not everyone knows what Roma people are, or who Roma people are, I should say. So Whoopi Goldberg on an episode of Let's Just Show the View, so she uses that word, which has been deemed derogatory. It has been deemed a slur for as long as I can remember. That said, a lot of people are not aware that it has been deemed a slur. So you have Charlemagne and the other host of that program say, well, I didn't know it was a slur. I've been using it for years. And they had continued to defend their use of it. And they did not care who found their use of it offensive. And I just began thinking about these intersections of oppression, and why is it offensive if someone of European descent uses the infamous, notorious N-word? That's not okay. But other folks who have faced systemic oppression based on their particular ethnicities, based on their particular ways of living, people who are Roma, and I'll just say they have been considered gypsies. I'll just say that. I don't want to say it again. But they have been displaced. They continue to be displaced. And yet, because you have no recognition or knowledge of that, therefore, their oppression lends to no significance to you. So you'll just continue to use that word, just like the other disparaging word for people who are spastic. And so when people say things, I think Beyonce recently had a controversy as well, where she edited out that word from one of her songs. That is a word that had been used since I was a kid, but it's also something that has been derogatory for perhaps longer than I've been alive. And there's this artist named Ian Jury, who he ended up contacting polio, and he has a song called Spasticus Autisticus. So he is a person who was upset. There was the BBC or whoever in the UK, they declared a day of the disabled person or something like that. And so he found that offensive as a disabled person. And so he made a song called Spasticus Autisticus based on his experience as a disabled person. And it was a song to represent the various people who have some sort of disability. So in particular, someone who is spastic and someone who has autism. And so, of course, the BBC and other stations would not play it because, oh, it's so offensive. It's just like, you deem me as offensive. You deem me as someone to feel sorry for. You deem me as someone to patronize. So I am writing this song in response to that because I am upset that you feel you need to be patronizing to me. And so it's that sort of thing where the patronizing behavior, the willful ignorance that someone else outside of yourself and your people could be and are experiencing oppression. And so I began to think about how that extends into other issues like environmentalism. How people are like, well, I'm living in the hood every day. I'm just trying to make it, whatever. And half my family has asthma. Do you not think that is an environmental issue? So I thought a lot about Cop City and how, people are looking at it primarily as an issue dealing with the expansion of police terrorism or policing itself. But it's also an environmental issue. The foundation, the formation, the building of Cop City would also be built on sacred land. So we also need to expand our mental horizons, if you will, about what it means to be oppressed. Because it's not just humans that are experiencing this sort of inhumanity, if you will. It's also sacred land that's being attacked when you are building these facilities to then further do watches on people. So you have, so then surveillance is increasing, then you have police terrorism increasing, but you also have an environmental issue. And another thing I thought about was what is, to me, the greatest album of all time, and what a lot of people considered, if not the greatest, one of the greatest albums of all time, What's Going On, Marvin Gaye. that is an album that does on some level discuss intersections of oppression. And people don't address that. I think it's funny. So Marvin Gaye does address police terrorism in that album. Marvin Gaye addresses environmentalism. Marvin Gaye addresses his own struggles with addiction in that album. So Marvin Gaye addresses the damages of imperialist war in that album. Marvin Gaye addresses racism in that album. So there are various ways that you can address it. And everyone loves this album. But people don't understand that it is addressing the various intersections. He's not just saying, I'm Black and I'm oppressed. It's just like the earth is also being trampled upon based on these particular individualistic and profit-based values. He may not be using those words, but it's very clear to me that's what he's talking about. So when I think of defend the Atlanta forests, I've tried to actually come in contact with them to, be guests on an episode. I haven't heard back, but hopefully, that will happen sooner than later. But,
Hopefully.
Organizations, groups working to protect the forest, I think that is something that we need to discuss in addition to the inhumanity of police terrorism. So there's a lot of things, but I'm gonna shut up for a minute as you talk.
No, yeah, I think you made an excellent point. You made a lot of excellent points. I would say all the points you made were amazing. So I think just even kind of rehash some of the things I was saying earlier before we started the podcast is like, even when you talk about things like Zionism, people, oh, you just care about the Arabs and that has nothing to do with us. And, and then recently, as it's been a long-standing relationship, a Zionist entity was out here, training the police and military forces over here pretty recently, as they've always been doing. So that ties directly to cop city and the police terrorism that we're experiencing here. And not to mention the level of technology exchange, when it comes to surveillance that's given to the U.S. empire to surveil people here and predominantly colonized folks like Africans in their neighborhoods, right? All those things that are intertwined, they're intersections in a way. So for us to think as though like, oh, well, we shouldn't care about them because they don't care about us and blah, 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 blah. Well, it's like, well, the same entity that's oppressing them is oppressing us, whether it's on the continent or, here. And just even on the basis of, if you want to stand for something that's just and right, you should, even if it doesn't directly impact Africans, which most cases it does in some ways or not, it does. But even if it doesn't, for some odd reason, we should still stand for justice, regardless of everything. We shouldn't stand on the side of the oppressors or say, oh, I'm just going to sit in the middle. I'm not going to say anything. At that point, you kind of already took your position. You already sided with the oppressors, in my opinion. If you're just saying, I'm not going to take a stand on a just cause, right? Like, you should say something. Work and actively work and organize around that too, and help others so it could be a mutual exchange between us and whatever group is dealing with that level of oppression. That's how we work together, and that's how we build, cohesion and larger formations in solidarity with these groups, essentially. So I think it's important that was the commentary I was saying, and I think I've alluded to this various times. No one is Superman. Even us as Africans, right? Like we need help too. We can't isolate ourselves and think that we're going to liberate ourselves, right? There's no liberation struggle that's been waged on the continent that didn't get aid. We talk about historically, during the 60s, the 50s, or whenever, up till now. Like, we see what's been happening in Mali, Burkina Faso, and so forth and so on, right? Like these people are creating ties with the external world because they need that, because we need, especially the position that Africa is in now, we need a lot of resources, that we don't have access to because of, U.S. Western imperialism, neocolonialism, and so forth and so on, right? So I think it's important for us to always make those connections, because once we don't make those connections, we miss the primary contradiction in all of this, which is typically U.S. imperialism.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. And another thing, when you were saying this, it made me think about making those connections where African folks are still uttering the rhetoric that Spanish speaking folks, and we know what they mean, not people from the Spain, the country in Europe, but folks from Central America and even Mexico, even though Mexico is part of North America, right? But Mexican people are trying to steal our jobs. People from Guatemala or Ecuador are trying to steal our jobs. And it just makes me think so much of AMLO or Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. AMLO, we're going to call him AMLO from here on out.
President of Mexico, right?
Yes. So he has been on a campaign. He's like, we need to wage a campaign against the blockade in Cuba. And he also has recently said that there is more democracy today in Mexico than in the United States. Well, he says, he said, because here the people govern and there the oligarchy govern. So he said that politicians in Washington will still not abandon the 2-century-old policy, the Monroe Doctrine, of thinking of themselves as the world government. He called it a centuries-old habit of the U.S. government and U.S. elites. So this is AMLO talking. So imagine all of the other countries that are combining economically. We just had a handshake. China facilitated. Okay, Saudi Arabia, which is one of the biggest allies of the U.S., are they not?
Yeah.
It's all empires fall. That's all I want to say. All empires fall.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say, that's even speaking of the intersections of things, these systems that function, that's directly related to the Yemen struggle, right? Because they've been, being bound by the Saudis and US and whatnot, right? And being sanctioned as well, so that's all correlated. So yeah, and just want to kind of bring that point home, that it's all interrelated. You can't look at it as just like, oh, well, that's just them. Well, there's people in Yemen who face that that struggle too. Yeah.
Right. But two places on the map that have been deemed enemies, quote unquote, for years, Saudi Arabia and Iran. They said, we're going to combine forces economically. And that was facilitated by China. And so when US officials were asked about this, of course, the word that I've seen, when they weren't even aware that this deal was going on.
Yeah.
So people are moving around the US. For the US to think that no one moves around them, hello.
Yeah.
Countries are moving around you all the time because increasingly countries are understanding that it's not sustainable to be dealing with the US. The US consistently attempts to be the world's policeman. I'm saying policeman for a reason. But people who have some sort of influence, whether that's nuclear weapons, whether that's some sort of economic influence or whatever, people are moving around and making deals and facilitating something. So we have to understand geopolitics is for people to say, well, this has nothing to do with me. There's a lot of moving going around you. So I suggest you learn about it. And so another part of North America, Mexico, where you have the president talking about oligarchs, we need to pay attention to that. Because Mexico, part of North America, is increasingly becoming socialist. So you have parts of South and Central America also increasingly becoming socialist. You have what happened recently at the African Union meeting, where quote unquote observers from Israel were kicked out. So people are starting to move and say, what is going on? So it's like, we got to pay attention to that stuff and not simply focus on the four walls of the US. That literally makes no sense to do, especially if you're talking about, well, how come we don't have money for this and that? Because the money's going towards infrastructure for Israel. It's going towards infrastructure to protect white supremacists in Ukraine.
Yeah. So billions and billions of dollars of our tax dollars going right to Ukraine, funding a losing war too at that. A Nazi regime. On top of that, that was backed by the U.S. In the Maidan coup that was through the democratically elected president back in 2014. So yeah, that's where your tax dollars go to, right? So and funding the oppression of Palestinian people as well, on top of many other groups of people that are being oppressed around the world. On top of them trying to, I think they even have a new bill for the defense budget to pass even more money to give to the defense budget, or overall in the U.S. So pretty much to spread more terrorism around the world, pretty much, and that's all tied to policing tools, tied to all of that, because we all know that with the building of Cop City, and to be honest, like Cop City is going to spread. It's not just going to be Atlanta. So if you think that, oh, well, it's just Atlanta people, because like everyone thinks in isolation here in the U.S., everything is isolated, nothing is interrelated here, that goes on. So, oh, well, it's in Atlanta, so it has nothing to do with us. Okay, you don't think that they're going to spread this over, as the U.S. is, people want to think that the U.S. is like just some country that moves off a whim and they don't predict things or plan things out 10, 15, 20, 30 years on the line. They understand and they know, obviously they're doing their best to try to keep their hold in the power and the empire to sustain themselves, but they know there's no way out of this. Like there's right. Like we can see like everything you announced with what's going on with BRICS, China, Russia, and everything like that. Like they're losing. Like the amount of failed coups that's been happening over the past like maybe 3 to 5 years is crazy. Even you think about how like the U.S. has been historically successful at like many coups around the world. But they're failing at that. They're failing at, funding various wars. You think of like Iraq, you think about what's going on in Ukraine and so forth and so on as well, right? And they're also losing their sway. And, everyone is wanting to, rushing to apply to BRICS. You talk about Algeria is contemplating it. Saudi Arabia already is like applied or looking to apply. Iran is the same thing. Egypt has talked about it. So forth and so on. Like many nations, you have nations in Central South America mulling over doing it, and more likely on the fence of doing it too. So it's inevitable. The dollar is going to lose its hegemony. The empire is going to fall, right? Like but so they know, with that being known and understanding, they know like, all right, since we're losing our international power, we have to maintain the power domestically. So that's why it's going to be many more cop cities and all these. That's why they have these. I don't know if you've seen these robot dogs that the police are training and stuff that they have. Like running into neighborhoods and shootings and stuff like that. Right now they're not making it appear like that. They're trying to, nice little dumb little robot dogs, right? They're just nice because of technology. No, they've already been used and tested in various places. And I'm sure, as more cop cities be built, you're going to start seeing those type of things more and more in our neighborhoods, and we also got to get out this understanding of like nothing happens overnight. Even the fall of the empire, no empires fall, tomorrow, right? We're not saying that, oh my God, in 2 months, everything is going to go back. Like, no, it's going to be a drawn out process. The process has been started for years. It's going to keep happening. And then eventually it's going to crumble, right? The same thing with the building out of the various cop cities, probably all around the U.S. and major cities around the world. Not around the world, I'm sorry, around the U.S. That is just going to, be a high level of surveillance. And, I think the contradictions are going to sharpen, because all these things that they pump into us with like anti-communist, anti-socialist rhetoric, like, oh, dictatorship, you can't leave your house. Oh, I talk about the DPRK in North Korea. Oh my God, everyone has to wear the same clothing. It's probably going to look like that here if cop cities are built all around. So yeah.
Now, since you said this, I wanted to talk about something else, but now since you're mentioning this, I want to talk about these couple of things.
Yeah.
Because when I think of Cop City and when I think of what I'm getting ready to mention, have you seen the movie RoboCop? Not the 2014 one. That one's awful.
Was that the one with
original? No? I'm sorry?
Oh, never mind. You said an original one?
Yes, 1987.
No, I didn't see that. No.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh, wow.
And it gave you so much. So I don't want to give too much away for folks who haven't seen it, but it literally talks about the militarization of the police, and not just that. It talks about the private takeover of police by these individual corporations. And then they were planning to make something called Delta City, which is going to displace thousands upon thousands of people. And this was based in what, Detroit, if I'm not mistaken? So this Delta City is going to displace thousands of people who reside in that part of Detroit. And in order to do that, they needed to create a particular policing system so as to displace people even faster. And they couldn't do it through humans. And so the human police figured that they, based on what was to come, were also being displaced. So they said, oh, what? We're going on strike. We're workers. It's kind of interesting how that works, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, they needed a way to do it faster because they were running out of time and they needed to build this city. And so I think about that with Cop City, the displacement of humans. And then I think about Mississippi House Bill 1020. I don't know if you know about that.
No.
So this works in the same exact way, but it does even more. It literally moves to Jim Crow type laws. So Jackson, Mississippi is majority African.
Yeah.
Mississippi, if I'm not mistaken, is the state out of all of the US that has the largest percentage of African people. I think that Jackson, Mississippi has an even higher percentage. So this House bill, which was passed, now they're looking for like Senate to pass it.
Wow.
But the House passed this bill, 1020. And I'm going to read the summary of this bill. It says, an act to create inferior courts in the Capital Complex Improvement District, or CCID, to hear certain criminal and civil matters occurring or occurring in the boundaries of the Capital Complex Improvement District, to provide judges for the CCID inferior courts that shall possess the same qualifications as circuit and chancery court judges, to provide for the appointment of the judges by the Chief Justice of the Mississippi Supreme Court. I'm going to repeat that. To provide for the appointment of the judges by the Chief Justice of the Mississippi Supreme Court. To provide for the salary and operating allowance of the judges. To require the Attorney General to appoint attorneys to prosecute cases within the jurisdiction of the CCID inferior courts. To require the state defender to appoint public defenders for defendants who fall within the jurisdiction of the CCID inferior courts. To provide for the appointment of a clerk and deputy clerk for the CCID inferior courts, to require the clerk to maintain a jury box, to describe the jurisdiction of the CCID inferior courts as all matters that occur or accrue within the boundaries of the Capital Complex Improvement District, to provide for the powers of the judges of the courts, to authorize jurisdiction for certain actions that occur or accrue within the CCID inferior courts, to amend section 29-5-203 Mississippi Code of 1972 to revise the boundaries of the Capital Complex Improvement District for purposes of amendment, to amend Section 27-65-75 Mississippi Code of 1972 to revise the distribution of state sales tax revenue for the CCID and for related purposes. What do you think that means before I talk about this? What do you think that means, Sadiq?
Well, I mean, yeah, you said a lot. I mean, I feel like I think overall, it's kind of you saying it's repealing a lot of the struggles that Africans take place against Jim Crow. And I believe eventually it's kind of like, once again, even with the Cop City thing to kind of tie it in, is that those things are going to, expand further. It's not just going to stay in places like Mississippi. It's probably going to, I would imagine it's going to spread in places in the Deep South, other places in the Deep South as well, and then probably make its way up at some point. And this is why it's important for Africans to stay focused and organizing on these things and stay abreast to what's going on, not only within your own city, your own town, your own state, but around the world, because these things are interrelated. A lot of these things are happening is because, once again, the U.S. is losing its vice grip. So we have to understand, and it's trying to clamp down even harder here. So we have to struggle relentlessly against these things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what this means, Sadiq, this is why I love RoboCop, because RoboCop was telling y'all, this is like the thing about movies, they actually inform you of stuff if you pay attention.
Yeah.
The House just voted to create a whole enclave in which the residents will be displaced. And if they're not displaced, they literally, the policing system is not accountable to the residents there.
Mm.
The Supreme Court is going to appoint judges. The people will not be voting for judges.
Yeah.
It is going to be a system unto itself, and it's going to terrorize the African people in that community.
Yeah.
That is what this means.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Man,
and then they voted to revise and appeal all of these things that are in writing. So I'm going to say this again. I'm not going to say it as slow. So it's to provide for the appointment of the judges by the Chief Justice of the Mississippi Supreme Court. So the Mississippi Supreme Court is going to appoint judges in this enclave in the Capital Complex Improvement District. So they are voting to create a Delta City unto itself.
Wow.
In which Africans reside. And it's like, this is our land now.
Exactly. Wow.
This is what the Mississippi House voted on.
This is like a gentrification on steroids, but even worse. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Mississippi House voted yes on this.
Yeah.
So we got to pay attention to the stuff. The sponsors: John Lamar, Fred Shanks, and Price Wallace. So Senate passes amended, House passes amended. So so it looks like Senate passed it.
Ooh. Yeah.
Oh, and I gotta recheck the Senate one, but House definitely passed it. And so yeah, like we're to create our own town, our own enclave, and we don't care if you live here, you don't get a say or you don't get to vote who the police are, you don't get to vote who the judges are. Usually, is it when you have a quote election day, don't you vote for judges?
Exactly.
Judges are going to be appointed in accordance to House Bill 1020.
Mm-hmm. And they repeal it. And it's funny because this is probably, when you look at I'm missing the name, the abortion repeal back. What's it called again?
Are you talking about the repeal of Roe v. Wade?
Roe versus Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I always kind of felt like that was like the starting point right there. I mean, granted, there's probably other laws we could probably look into, but I guess the more notable one is them peeling that back. Obviously it started by just states, and then now even what you're saying, with what's going on in Jackson, Mississippi. and once again, people look at these things. Oh yeah, Roe versus Wade. My state. It's legalized here. Okay, all right. Let's see what happens in like 20, 30 years or something like that, where they start slowly pulling that back. And the same thing in Jackson, Mississippi, is like, oh, that's just Jackson. That's nothing to do with me. Okay, let's see if they start, starts getting wider, and the other cities start adopting these bills and starts getting passed. Right, like these things aren't going to happen in isolation, in my opinion. Like nothing happens in isolation. So we're going to feel the ramifications of that. And even then, let's say, for instance, in the off chance it doesn't spread, any of these things don't spread. We are African people. We're people of African descent, so we should care about what's affecting Africans, no matter where they are. At that point, then it's like you can't say, "Oh, I'm for African people," when your people are being brutalized and their laws and human rights are being taken away from them. Right in front of your eyes. You're just gonna sit there and be like, "Oh yeah, like African liberation, yeah, but I don't care about them down there though." Like it doesn't make sense. It's incoherent. So this is why
no. There's what state is it? Alabama. I'm sorry if I'm getting the state wrong, but if you have an abortion, you are committed you are declared to have committed a felony, and that is worth the death penalty. That is what's happening now.
Yeah.
So this is happening. And then also in Tennessee, there was a GOP lawmaker that asked to bring back hanging, to bring back lynching. This is what's happening right now in Tennessee.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's like so anyone who says that racism is dead, we just need to the old people just need to go, and we just have to look at people's hearts and just get people's hearts and conscience. These things are instilled into law. These people who decide laws are saying these things and voting them in. This whole idea is that you just get people's hearts and minds. That's not enough.
Yeah.
People gotta stop doing that and stop looking at racism as an individual thing. Because there's something that happened. I could go about this all day. There's something that happened recently where somebody was deemed to be lynched. Mississippi. So they found his remains after a month, and they looking at what some evidence they found happened to be, they believe that he was lynched and dismembered.
Wow.
So this is happening right now. People are getting lynched. People are getting dismembered. You had these girls in middle school in Portland, Oregon, making a video. Yeah. And then the school didn't say anything until people were talking about it on social media. And then we're like, oh, we're so sorry. So it's just the St. Hubert Catholic high school for girls. So there were some girls who were sitting in a room. One girl was spraying another girl with was it like shoe polish or something, or like some spray thing, spray paint or something, being like, it's Black History Month. It's Black History Month. You're a slave now. I saw the video. And then the girl who was getting sprayed was like, and it's clear, like it looked like a case of bullying just in that case. Like, oh, you're the one that's going to be sprayed. So she's being sprayed. Why are you spraying something in her face like that? First of all, that could damage somebody's sight.
Right, yeah.
But they're just spraying her. And she's like, I'm Black and I'm proud. And he's calling her a slave. And I think they probably use the N-word. So this idea that the old people are dying out, these kids are using TikTok doing that.
Yeah.
Where are they getting it from?
Yeah. Man, there's been blackface done on little teenagers, little kids on social media, on Halloween. That's like the biggest time we see it the most. It's like people dress up in blackface and mocking Africans and stuff like that. Like it's exactly. Very sick. And even when we think of these European militias, European, / white supremacist militias out here in the US, like they're predominantly the people, or the ones that are like predominantly shooting up these schools tend to be like, younger, European people of European descent. So, where, you know, committing terrorist acts at religious institutions like mosques and churches and stuff, right? Like these people aren't always, you know, middle-aged, you know, older Europeans. Like to think that's nuts. Like you could just count and look up how many, you know, mass shootings they were, and you know, look at their background and look at how old they were. They were typically young.
Y'all think all the people that was in Charlottesville were old?
Exactly.
Come on now. Like, and there was another incident in Oregon. Where I lived in Oregon for what, 13 years? I already know. So West Sylvan Middle School. So again, Portland Public Schools didn't say anything. So there's another incident, West Sylvan Middle School. And there was a student who is African. He went to, and this is the biggest irony of all. So he asked to use the water fountain. So he goes out to use it. Two other students, they confront him. And then so they attack him, they assault him, and said they were going to do a George Floyd on him. Yeah. And so they put a knee behind his back and said, you're going to wait 20 seconds. They said they're going to turn the camera off, all this kind of stuff. And the school, Portland Public Schools, they, you know, apologized, but it took a little bit.
Wow.
So these are happening to these kids.
Yeah.
So people talking about, oh, you know, the generation is different. It's like, there's always been people who are anti-racist who were young at all generations. So I don't even want to hear like, well, the generation as a whole is like, you got people like Chris Rock sitting there letting these white men say the N-word in front of him. He's just he and hiding.
Yeah. He's
nothing has changed.
Yeah, he's justified it too.
Right. There's a system embedded. You can change as many people's hearts as you want, but if the system of white supremacy is embedded deeply into the society, it's not going anywhere. This is the thing people need to understand. And the only way that things change is if people organize against that system. And people are like, no, I'm a little too comfortable, so I'm not going to do, you know, I'll just try to change people's hearts. Okay, are you going to change people's hearts to go and actually change that the fact that the House voted positively to create a whole enclave where people can't even vote for judges? Like, you literally think that changing somebody's heart is going to change that?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And that's the thing, is like, changing hearts doesn't change political power. Like, that doesn't, you know, you can't change political power by changing hearts, right? Like, it doesn't work that way. There's no, like, you think all these oppressed groups who've liberated themselves, you think if they could have done it that way, you think they wouldn't have tried to right, you think they wanted to resort to shooting and war and, you know, them losing their potentially losing their lives, you know, to free themselves? Like, obviously, you know, that I mean, I think Guinea-Bissau was a perfect example. Like, the PIGC first tried to do a nonviolent struggle, and they found out very quickly after a massacre took place, like, oh, they ain't trying to hear that. The Portuguese ain't trying to hear that. So we got to take up arms. You know, we got to struggle around this in a different way, in a different manner. So we just have to look at the material conditions and what we're dealing with at the end of the day. So, like, and also to change hearts, you will have to probably personally know everyone that's all these judges and all, like, how are you going to get to, you think they're going to let you just like walk up, hey, so, you know, about this, you know, like, I don't know what people think this is, what's going on. Or people think that you could change hearts by a Netflix documentary or something. Like, you think these people, like, they did a whole Netflix documentary on the oppression of Palestinian people, and Palestinians are still being oppressed.
Exactly. Right.
You can't change the hearts of Zionists, bro. Like, it's not going to happen. Like, nothing, it's not going to change.
So we got another Mississippi. See, Mississippi, man. Yeah. So you got these police that, you know, beat, they handcuff, they do their version of waterboarding to these two African men, because they roll up on them and are like, hey, you dealing drugs, and allegedly, like, oh, you dating white women, so we got to deal with you. This is what's happening. This is what's happening right now. It's 2023, And why are people shocked? I can't believe this is still happening. It's like, what? You think white supremacy has shifted?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Because just because you ain't hear about it, or you choose not to hear about it, doesn't mean it's not happening.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think we get so used to reducing everything to our interpersonal relationships. And this is not to blame people. Once again, I always emphasize this. It's not to blame individuals. The systems that obviously indoctrinate us to believe in like Western exceptionalism, believe in individualism, so we don't see things in a broader scope. Like even when we think about like the baseball, World Series, and mind you, is only taking place in the U.S., right? Or we the world champions, and it's like, someone can say, oh, that's looking too deep into it, that's subtle, but no, that's like low, that's low levels of indoctrination to tell you that the
Right.
U.S., they're trying to put in our minds that the U.S. is the world. You don't need to look outside the U.S. All your news sources need to come from CNN, ABC, and anything backed by imperialism, right? Like, anything outside of that is quote unquote woke culture or like fake news and all this other stuff, right? So that's what they try to indoctrinate us with, and it's something that the system is really good at. So we just have to do as organizers a better job to getting our analysis out there and rebuttaling what what our enemies are trying to say about us or indoctrinate us with.
Right. And there's so many stories, but I'm gonna leave it at a couple more, maybe one more after 30. But I know that you have heard, because I think you work in some level in finance. I don't know, but the whole Silicon Valley Bank.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting because 2008 people were talking about, oh, bank bailouts, da, 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 da. And then that was one of the first things Obama did when he got in, was like bail out banks and bail out some airlines, I think, or something. And so there was the Silicon Valley Bank that failed, and of course they got bailed out. And who does that affect? Working people, as usual. So
yes.
But I wanted to read a little bit of another counterpunch piece. It's called "This is Fascism: SVB Bailout Edition." This is the very public failure of SVB is raising concerns of a renewed wave of bank failures that threatens Western economies. So Western economies are getting it at all sides. So you get people coming together to forge their own economic strengths, and then you got these banks failing. So karma. I am a huge believer in karma. And the US, all empires fall, as you mentioned earlier. So stop trying to put a band-aid on a gaping wound. And I think Iceland did that thing where they failed too, and they just kind of like let it sieve out, and then they repaired themselves. The US could never do that because there's a lot at stake. But it's just, you gotta fail, and then I don't know. It's just so weird.
Yeah.
Narcissism. Anyway, the subtext is residual fear that earlier mid-2000s bank crises was never adequately addressed. The very bankers who sank the banking system back then were handed trillions in public largesse to cover their losses. But the system of Wall Street provision of credit to fuel capitalism was never reconsidered. As then Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, remember him, put it, the U.S. doesn't do nationalization of banks. There it is. You just hold on. You're just like, we can't do that. Everything has to be privatized. They fail, we'll take your money and help them, but no, we can't strengthen banks by nationalizing them. Absolutely not. No, we're not going to do that. Part of the political calculus behind the earlier bailouts was the role of Wall Street in support of American imperialism. Neoliberalism was claimed in a constructive way to be war by any other means, because it transferred wealth from the economic periphery to the center without a shot being fired. Trade was to replace warfare, went the theory. That the US has been the most capitalist and most militaristic nation in the world over the last century has done little to discredit this theory amongst true believers. These true believers now run the US. Following decades of misleading free market rhetoric in the US, the Biden administration is currently basing its economic policies in economic warfare with China and Russia, not free trade. In fact, the CIA and the MIC were always in the background softening up reluctant capitalists with cluster bombs and white phosphorus. Current American logic lightly has the Chinese state's use of state banks to allocate credit as equivalent to the American practice of handing trillions in bailouts to the American bankers that blew up the Western world in 2008. The collapse in near instantaneous federal bailout of uninsured depositors at SVB by the Biden administration provides insight into the ongoing role of technology finance and the MIC in American governments. Rhetoric around saving the banking system is the local truth hidden within the larger problem of the failing neoliberal order. The system being saved is directly or indirectly tied to American forever wars, environmental decline, a predatory and extractive economic system, and rising political repression. On the one hand, there was a bank, SVB, whose liabilities exceeded the bank's value that needed to be resolved. On the other hand, there were questions of the role of the banking system economically, as well as the broader role of Wall Street in American imperialism. Prior to 2008 to 2009, there was a long history of bank crises, as well as the set rules of determining which banks were viable and which weren't. In 2009, the Obama administration, through this theory and the rules that had previously led to successful resolution of bank crises, in the trash. So I've read quite a few perspectives on this bank failure. And so from the sort of financial institution perspective, it's like, well, the SVB, they were sort of building businesses, and they gave out loans to these smaller businesses, and they weren't insured, so we're going to be all right. So that was one theory. The other theory, of course, was banks got bought out, we got sold out. So it's just like one of the two. And I feel like this is sort of the middle explanation of that. It's like, of course, banks in and of itself are going to be all right because they're protected by the capitalist system. But then it's also using these intersections of imperialism, of it's just so I think that articles like this are going to really give you a better understanding, because if we're going to have the sort of simplistic view of fascism, and it's the view that folks like Mussolini, if you will, gave, it's the marriage of state and corporation. So this is fascism, SVB.
With the SVB thing too. You may have highlighted it in the piece you read, but like the fact that most of the depositors were over the FDIC limit of 250,000, right? Because that's the only thing they had up until insured. Exactly. So once that happened and they realized that, they were like, oh, we're still going to cover it even if it's over 250,000, because most of the depositors there had well over that amount. So, and that's an SVB. So yeah, the capitalists, the petty bourgeoisie, overall, a lot of these startups, got their money back, and it was done like in a quick amount of time. Like they told them, I can't remember, this happened like on a Friday, and I think they promised them their money like by this Monday, either this Monday coming up or this past Monday that just passed. So you see how quick, so we can't even, I don't want to hear about like, oh, it's going to take time. Like they could, with a drop of a dime, they could allocate the money to, even when we think about the COVID money that we got, right? Like the $1,200 or whatever that some people may have received, or most people received, whatever. That, at least for me, it was no drawn out process. It didn't take them, half a year to distribute that money. So that goes to show that they're really just playing in our faces and just literally throwing the money away to imperialism and throwing the money away to the capitalist ruling class while we suffer. While infrastructure goes terrible. Like, why don't we have, if this is the best nation in the world, why don't we have high speed bullet trains, right? Like, why don't we have that here, right? Why it's like every other week trains are collapsing and highways are collapsing and all this other stuff is going on. Like, why? Like the contradictions are kind of apparent when you really start looking at things that are happening geopolitically and around the world essentially. So it's right there, right? Because the money that's supposed to be going to our infrastructure is supposed to be going to the betterment of the lives of people here, particularly Africans, is going away to, as we alluded to earlier, to fund terrorism around the world, and which supports the U.S. For them to profit at the end of the day. So it's so why they're trying to eradicate extreme poverty in China, and we haven't even made the wealth gap is widening. Is even what I think CNBC have reported that like 60% of people are living paycheck to paycheck here in the United States. Like even people who are making 100,000 are I think like 40 or 50%. It might even be 60 with them too. They're even also living paycheck to paycheck due to the inflation and everything. Like why? But these are the places that they're telling you is not democratic, and this is the true democracy, right? So, yeah, like why is it so expensive to buy homes? Like people can't even afford homes now because inflation's so high, because the interest rates are so crazy for a lot of people. So it's like I don't know. It's a lot of questions.
I'm gonna get on you for saying we, because who's we?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's funny because I get on people for doing that. So self criticism, self criticism. I actually get on people for saying because ain't no such thing as we. I ain't even part of this. I'm right. Good. I'm not dying with Empire. Nah, I refuse, man. I'm not dying with Empire. I know some of y'all want to die with Empire. Like, Master, please, no, Master. We're gonna go with you, boss. We gotta go with you. We're gonna die with you, boss. I'm not doing that. Ain't no we. I apologize. Thank you for the correction, Conrad. Ain't no we.
But I think the 10-second or less explanation is planned economy versus market economy.
Exactly.
If you continue to see these bank bailouts happen and you are so adamant against the nationalization of banks, that's a problem. So you got to figure that out, homie.
Exactly.
Speaking of infrastructure, this is the last thing I want to talk about. And we can get into whatever else, but this is the thing I really wanted to talk about. Is my goodness, the attack on particular grid systems. So these are things that had been happening for a while. It's been severely underreported, but there have been a number of things, particularly more recently, Russia Today. And it talks about how American friends of Ukrainian Nazis plotted a terror attack in the U.S. and the media ignored the story. I would add purposely ignored the story.
Of course. Yeah. You know how they do it.
It says American far-right radicals linked to neo-Nazis from the Ukrainian Azov Battalion have been charged with conspiring to stage a terrorist attack in Baltimore, Maryland. Why all the states that start with M is having problems? I don't understand that.
I know, right?
Let's not expand that, okay? I'm just saying. Like, let's keep it, library voice. Keep it library voice, and don't expand this terrorism. Come on, people. Like, just stop it.
Just stop it. Yeah. Cool.
However, U.S. media reporting on the story does not mention connections between the group and the militants. Additionally, the attempted terrorist act may be the first sign of the threat that Azov members and their foreign friends pose to Western countries. This is very similar. I think we're back in 1945. I'm telling you, you had Jim Crow happening. You got Nazis everywhere. The U.S. protecting Nazis. This is World War II all over again. I just.
But one could argue that instead of United States fighting against the Nazis, they're actually fighting with them.
Well, I mean, the U.S. did collaborate on some levels.
Level. That's
Henry
true.
Ford.
Yeah. That's
so,
true. And a lot of those former
companies,
Nazis after they actually got integrated in Western society, had higher positions in like NATO and so forth and so on.
Exactly. So there was some collaboration going on.
Yeah, for sure.
Says in early February, the U.S. Justice Department announced the indictment of neo-Nazis Sarah Beth Clendaniel and Brandon Clint Russell for conspiracy to destroy energy substations in Baltimore. Authorities described the pair's plans as, quote, driven by their ideology of racially motivated hatred. If convicted, they each face a maximum of 20 years. Beginning in June 2022, though possibly earlier, the pair plotted a series of attacks against substations using balloons and rifle fire with the goal of shorting out power transformers and depriving thousands of residents of light and heat. Come on.
Come on, man.
Like, y'all are so white supremacists that you don't want anybody to have light and heat. They specifically aim to carry this out when there is greatest strain on the grid and energy demand was highest. Russell shared maps of plans targets with Clendaniel, outlining how even low-level strikes on electrical substations could cause a cascading failure across Baltimore's entire electricity grid, an impact that would be maximized by hitting multiple sites simultaneously. Clendaniel envisioned the plan would permanently, completely lay the city to waste in supposedly encrypted messaging app chats. So the thing I have to say about this is I learned it by watching. You remember that drug commercial that happened when the kid was in bed and he's spoken, the father's like, "What is this?" Like,
yeah,
watching you. This is exactly what the U.S. did to Chile. Wiped out the grid system.
Yeah.
So the U.S. has no place to talk about Nazis. I'm just saying.
Exactly.
The U.S. understands very well what this means. So it's very clear that, this again, getting back to intersections, this is not simply about race. Yeah, they have white supremacist ideologies going on, but they're literally like, they're not saying, well, it's just all Negroes over here that live here. No, like they're trying to wipe out a whole system.
Exactly. Yes.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Come on, man. This is about systemic power. So it says Russell is the founder of Atomwaffen Division, also known as the National Socialist Resistance Front, an international neo-Nazi terrorist network. In January 2018, he was jailed for possessing an unregistered destructive device and illegally storing explosives. An FBI bomb technician claimed the material was sufficient to completely destroy an airliner, and prosecutors say he planned to use it in terrorist attacks targeting civilians, nuclear facilities, and synagogues across the U.S. Okay? While in video, Russell issued a video message to his followers, thanking them for their undying loyalty and courage, and promising his incarceration would not stop Atomwaffen's mission.
I wonder if he's labeled anti-Semitic for trying to, do that to synagogues. So.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. If he's associated with the Nazis, guaranteed this.
Yeah, hopefully.
Guaranteed.
I don't know.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
If he's not, I would be surprised. So the funny thing about all this is, I mean, we could talk about the U.S. contributing to these groups in Ukraine, sort of having more access to weapons, intelligence, whatever. But then we have to look at the history of the U.S. Like we can't and focus on these individuals and be like, oh, see, just put him in jail and. No, that's not going to work. This is literally taking out whole power grids. They learn from the best. I'm just They learn from the best on how to do this. These people studied and they're organized. And I think that's the key thing, is that they are organized and they have a particular system of political education they're working with. So if people are like, well, they just, they'll just be a jail and then you won't see this stuff anymore. It's like, no. So you have to understand these people are organizing. I know people focus on like major events like January 6th or whatever, but these people have moved on from that.
Exactly.
They're organizing outside of that. It's like, well, that was deemed a failure. Let's just find something else.
Every time.
Maybe it wasn't a failure to them. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think they try to belabor the point of it, like, oh my God, it's a threat to society and democracy. And I think they know all in all, it was not going to be no real seizure of power, or political power. Like, these are random people. They're not even, the people who tried to do this weren't even organized themselves. They just did a random act in the sake of Trump. So the state knows that, but they try to conjure it up like, oh, the right wing is the enemy. Oh God, these right wingers and blah 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 blah. Right? Instead of telling you, who your real enemy is, which is capitalists and imperialists, right? Who help fund these various political entities and control them in a way, these multinational, transnational corporations. So of course you can't have your enemy trying to tell you who your enemy is or define it for you, because they're not gonna point the finger at themselves. They're not gonna be like, oh, it's me, so get rid of me. Right? Yeah.
There's actually a veterans group. They did a whole ad calling for the ban of Fox News at their facilities. They said that's literally the only thing that's aired in these facilities. So I mean, soldiers are coming out and talking about misinformation. So I'm telling you, people are coming out. We're talking about, this is what the age of Aquarius, this is the age of mass information. People are coming out and be like, wait a minute now. So I'm telling you, it's just like everything's dialectical. So the overabundance of information, that can be a little too much. But at the same time, people are like, all right, okay. Like, okay. So it also says, an investigation in 2020 by the West Point Military Academy's Combating Terrorism Center found that Ukraine had long held a particular attraction for white supremacists, ideologues, activists, and adventurers alike. So they just figured out in 2020 this was going on. Really? Okay. The abundance of nationalist groups involved in 2014's US-led Maidan coup was electrifying to far-right individuals and groups in Europe, the US, and further afield, the investigation records. Shouldn't that investigation have been done in 2014? Anyway, neo-Nazis the world over began flooding Ukraine, which they consider to be a new fascist state in the making. There it is. There it is. A particular attraction was the Azov Battalion, which enjoyed support from within the government of then President Petro Poroshenko and the security services, despite well-documented human rights abuses. So there have been plenty documented human rights abuses. Queer folks are targeted. Particular religious beliefs were targeted. You cannot speak Russian in some parts of Ukraine in public. So are you trying to tell me that the US is talking about freedom of expression and democracy? Okay, so why are you funding Ukraine if that's what you're about? So it's question a lot of those things before you're like, Ukraine, question. Stop. Just stop following things wholesale.
Exactly.
And question why you're following something.
Hey, why do you support Ukraine? Like, study the history of it, and study it in a real, like, as we alluded to, dialectical way. Like, read all the information around it. Just don't read what CNN and what Washington and the State Department have to say on it. Read alternatives to that and to on what's been going on, what's on the ground as well, and then make your own conclusion. Like,
exactly.
So
look up Project Aerodynamic. I think was that 1935. You can go on the U.S. government's website, just like they have all these other projects going on to squelch dissent against imperialism, neocolonialism, and capitalism around the world. They want to squelch any socialist movements around the world. Project Aerodynamic was the same thing, where they just looked to Ukraine and the Soviet influence there. And then you have the Stefan Banderas, where they have a street named after that guy.
Oh my God.
Ukraine.
Oh my God.
He collaborated with the Nazis.
Or
supported the Nazi war effort.
Exactly. And that's the ideologue for the Azov Battalion. Yeah, that's the ideologue for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is who y'all like when you say I love Ukraine. This is who you support.
Yeah.
No, but the grandmas and okay. There's grandmas in Russia. There's grandmas all around the world that are being oppressed based on blockades, based on sanctions, but I don't see you putting their flags up.
Exactly. Even still, like, people have to understand that this is a special military operation that Russia is engaged in. It's not an all-out war that they engaged in, because they understand that they didn't even want to go to this war, essentially, because many of the people who occupy and live in Ukraine are ethnically Russian.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or they speak Russian, or they are Russian, or they identify as Russian. Hence why, the referendum with the Donetsk and the other territories who agreed to be a part of Russia. So yeah, so they've been purposely not trying to bomb infrastructure. They're targeting those the military and the neo-Nazis of Ukraine. So so for someone to be complaining about grandmas and all that stuff, yeah, maybe there may be some mistakes and instances where that may happen, but it is nothing like what the U.S. did in Iraq, where they're just kids killing innocent people, bystanders, left and right, and all out war, right? That is not the same thing that's going on in Ukraine. Like, so for you to conflate that is nonsense. Like, and many people don't even know about, the coup, the Maidan coup. They don't know anything past what happened last year in February and March. You ask them about anything before then, they're like blind. Many people don't even know where Ukraine is on the map.
They don't know the audio from Victoria Nuland. Where she's on tape being like, no, we don't want that person, we want that person. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but they literally are having a conversation about who they want to govern Ukraine. Why is it anyone from the US's business who governs Ukraine? The people of Ukraine should be deciding who governs Ukraine. And if people in a particular region of Ukraine are like, we don't want to be associated with the Nazis because we are ethnic Russians, and then you call, well, Russia's just trying to excuse me, Russia's trying to steal Crimea and force people. It's like, no, they democratically voted. So pay attention and study all sides to, as you said, to come to an informed decision, because this is ridiculous. Where the other question I have is like, how are you going to be talking about, well, our treatment in the news is horrible, but then be okay with how other people are treated because you don't care or don't identify with it? That doesn't make sense. How are you going to believe the same news source that it dehumanizes you? The same news source dehumanizes other people around the world, and you just don't care? That makes sense to me.
But when they say they don't care about our struggle, oh my gosh, see, look, we have no friends. They don't care about us.
Right.
Like,
okay.
Right. You can't have it both ways. Right. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Make that make sense. So it's just interesting. So getting back to the intersections, and we've talked about a lot of things, but they're still containing a whole bunch of intersections, because not only are people concerned about tax dollars, or not only are your tax dollars funding the oppression of people around the world, but that is connected to your oppression, decidedly connected to your oppression. If you don't think it is, as Sadiq mentioned, look at policing in the US and tell me how that's not connected to policing around the world. Just tell me. Just as something as simple as saying policing. And most of us, when we think of police, we're gonna be like, oh. But just think about the daily struggle people have against police terrorism around the world. You ain't the only person experiencing that. That makes no sense to think you're the only person experiencing that. So, I don't know. We got it. I mean, I could talk about a lot more, but I'll stop there. So what you got?
Yeah, no. I think we covered it all, in my opinion. I think we covered the whole gamut. So I think it's kind of what we always say most episodes, but for those who maybe first time listeners or don't listen as often, we always tell you, as just reiterate the main highlights of what I said, or what was said, is make sure you study things on all sides. Read everything. Just don't trust what someone puts in front of you. Don't just trust what we put in front of you. Interrogate it, right? Like go look up the stuff yourself as well. right? Like don't expect someone to just spoon feed you all the time. Like go ahead and just don't trust us. I'm the same way. Like if someone just says something, whether I'm ideologically aligned with them or not, I go double check it. Not to say, oh, I think you're lying all the time. It's just to confirm on my own and see with my own two eyes and read the other side and read all aspects to it. And then with that said, it's like once you know about these things and you read about it or whatever, like definitely organize around these things because as Jamilah alluded to before, it's like the state that is oppressing us is organized. So we have to do the same thing to combat it. That's how you think China done this on its own. And that's the thing. People talk, oh, just Xi. No, it's the CCP or CPC and Xi Jinping. Like he's a part of the CPC too as well. Or you talk about North Korea or Iran, whatever, right? Like these are organized forces, that have political power for the most part, that are able to successfully beating imperialism, right? Like we can't isolate it. So if we want to, the repeat victory, let's study victory and let's repeat that, right? And let's organize. Let's do that. So,
so I have one more question for you before we end. So, in terms of the vote with Mississippi, and there are people, even with Roe v. Wade, with all of these things, people clearly are scared, and they are definitely within their right to be. What would be a response you have for folks who, appeal to these governments? Like, why don't you don't like me because of my skin color, or like what is it about women? You hate women, or like my response to that, it's not that they don't like they don't care about you as an individual. They don't care about your skin color. They care about the fact that you do not have institutional power. They care about the fact that we collectively are not organized. So that's what they're banking on, for us to not be collectively organized. So they can vote on these things and say, okay, we're just going to go in and appoint people. And then you have 10 people in front of the city hall or whatever, be like, this is wrong. But if there was like 10,000 of us, then that's a different story.
Exactly.
I don't know. What would you say to somebody who is scared right now?
Yeah, they, like you said, they don't look at us as humans. Like they look at us as money, right? Like it's profit. Like how do they profit off our labor and our, our conditions, right? Like how do they? So trying to appeal to a group of people or institutions that have no morality is not going to make us have any type of gain in the struggle against them. So asking them why, they just gonna shrug their shoulders and say you don't care. Like like you asking them why. So what's the next step after you ask them why? They say you don't care, right? You're just gonna keep complaining and yelling why they continue to brutalize, kill, oppress us. Like that isn't going to change the material conditions of anybody, including the person complaining or saying, oh, why? They can give less if it's African, European, whatever, right? Like, and also we got to understand for you to be, because people say, oh, I have to go, make all this money and be a part of the system, and then I could change it. If you're not aligned ideologically with them, if you are trying to ascend to their power and you're not ideologically aligned, once you get to a certain point, they're going to get rid of you, right? Whether they take away all your money or any type of power you may have gotten, which is probably little to none because you probably don't own and control the means of production. But any semblance of power you think you have, they will remove it from you before you even get there. Like, once again, this system isn't dumb. As much as I've lamented the fact of like, oh, failed coups, places like Peru and whatnot as of recent, we can't just underestimate the enemy, right? Like, we have to understand that this whole system is designed and it's been designed methodically. So yeah, it's going to take a very drawn out process for us to organize, for us to study, and for us to mobilize against these things, because that's how it's happened historically, and that's the only way that we're going to win against this beast that we're facing here. So yeah.
Absolutely. And if you appreciate some of this content, we have comrades doing similar content in various styles. So we have our Ancestors' Voices on Sundays. We have the weekly, which is not weekly at this point, Pan-African News. And we have Revolutionary African Women. And oh my goodness, we have so many things going on. And
we also have Burkina Books in Burkina Faso, even though it's not a podcast, but we have comrades in Burkina Faso.
But they're doing the work. They're doing the work.
Exactly.
Absolutely. There's the Forward Ever podcast. There's the Forward Ever shop.
Yeah. Support the clothes. Things. Support A-APRP.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have African Liberation Day coming up. And then we have so many events. Pan-African Women's Day will be coming sooner than later. So many things. So much work to do till we get to liberation. And whether or not we see liberation in our lifetime, that doesn't mean the work shouldn't be done. So as we always talk about the ancestors leaving the work for us to do, hopefully we will have left when we leave this earth work for future generations to do. And we hope that you do that work as well, contribute to a better world, join an organization. If you're like, oh, I don't know, I'm scared, I don't have time, talk to somebody about how to do it. If you really feel like that's not a priority to me, at least do something to support someone in an organization. Do something to contribute to the show. Don't just sit there and complain that something's wrong. Don't just sit there and be like, and all these kind of sounds coming out your mouth or whatever. Contribute, do something in whatever way that is. But understand that the struggle's not individual. It is a collective struggle. So again, if you are like, I don't know, I'm not ready to join an organization. Not everyone is. We're not judging you, but at least contribute in some way to someone who is. Be part of that collective struggle in whatever way you physically, mentally, financially, emotionally, whatever way can. But we're all here doing this together because we have to. It is a necessity for our survival. It is a necessity to make the world a better place. And as we always say at the end of every episode, forward ever, backwards never.
Forward.